Everyone, very, very warm welcome from me as well to this IntelligenceSquaredPlus event. With me and Nita Farahany, as we're casting in as we are from different hotel rooms around the world. Nita is Professor of Law and Philosophy at Duke, and she's a founding director of the Duke Initiative for Science and Society. And from 2010 all the way through to 2017, she served as commissioner on the US Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues and on the board of advisors for Scientific American. And her brilliant new book, which of course we're going to be discussing today, is Battle for Your Brain, Defending the Right to Think Freely in the Age of Neurotechnology. So, and I'm sure you're all very familiar with this by now. Me and Nita are going to be talking for about 40 minutes or so, and then it's going to be over to you for questions. So do start writing those in the tab, do tweet too, and then I'll get to you before too long, I promise. Nita, very, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to join you today.
Awesome. All right. Well, the first question is going to be hopelessly crude or simple to begin. Tell us what brainwaves are, what this is all actually, in its raw essence about.
Sure. And I should say, we'll say brain data more generally, because they're brain waves, which is something that I talk a lot about in the book, but there's also other forms of brain data that can be collected. So, as you think, as you do a math calculation, as you listen to music, as you do anything, experience anything, there are representations of that in the brain. And that can come in the form of brain waves. That is, as you think or experience something, neurons are firing in your brain, which give off tiny electrical discharge. When you have a big thought, any kind of state, hundreds of thousands of neurons are firing at the same time, giving off concurrent electrical discharges that can be picked up and detected through sensors that are applied to the scalp or through a device that picks up oxygenation levels in the brain and changes in oxygenation level in different regions of the brain. And so brain waves are the different frequencies and amplitudes of the different firings of neurons in your brain. And those happen in characteristic patterns that, as AI gets better and better, can actually be deciphered and decoded. So as you're thinking, what is Nita going to say next? There are neurons firing in your brain, which have different amplitudes and frequencies and different brain waves. And those can be detected with something called electroencephalography, or EEG, which are just sensors that pick up that activity.
And I know what you mentioned it just before we were joined by everyone, a new Nature study, which is kind of exposing how kind of machine learning based forms of interpretation are moving forward. So I know it's moving forward very quickly, but just give us a sense of just how kind of rapid now the kind of capabilities that we have to read brain data are advancing.
Sure. So, with EEG, or electroencephalography, you're picking up basic brain waves, which can tell basic brain states. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you paying attention? Is your mind wandering? Are you bored or engaged? Do you have a positive or a negative response to some kind of stimulus? What we were talking about just a few moments ago is much more advanced technology that can peer more deeply into your brain. So the use of something like functional magnetic resonance imaging. So people are familiar with these giant MRI machines that can image inside of the body. fMRI can image what's happening inside of the brain, in particular, what's functionally happening inside of the brain. So as you are thinking thoughts, different regions of the brain are active. And so blood flows into a region and flows out of the region. As it flows into the region, it's carrying oxygen. That oxygen is consumed by the brain activity in that region, which means the deoxygenated blood flows out of it. And that can be picked up. Those differences, the blood oxygenation levels, can be picked up by functional magnetic resonance imaging. Now, most people thought that it was too slow of a measure, the blood flow into and out of a region, as opposed to EEG, which is the rapid firing, to be able to decode thoughts, literally the continuous language that you experience in the brain. And researchers out of Texas just published a paper in Nature yesterday on May the 1st, to show that by using the advances in AI, in particular generative AI, so they use GPT-1 to predict what the next word is based on brain activity data, that they could decode continuous language and semantic content. not literally word for word, although oftentimes literally word for word, but the entire meaning of a sentence, the meaning of a sentence as well, being decoded based on brain activity. They then wanted to see if the, fMRIs are not something that we're going to have in our everyday lives. They're big, cumbersome machines. They're incredibly expensive to have people into them. So they wondered whether or not with non-invasive, meaning something that's not implanted in the brain, would it be possible to use the same model, the classifier that they had trained on people's brain activity, to be able to decode using FNIRS, functional near infrared spectroscopy. And this is a light shined through the skull, which based on the diffusion of the light, an infrared light through the skull, picks up different kind of tissue dynamics. Again, it's picking up this oxygenation levels in the brain. And they found that their classifier worked on FNIRS as well, which could be far more portable. In fact, I'll show you, this is a portable FNIRS device, which literally you can just wear, across the forehead like this, and it picks up brain activity. Now, this isn't the device that they were using to train it on, but presumably something even like this could start to pick up thoughts and thought activity. It just has these sensors here, which shine light through the brain, through the skull, and pick up that activity as you engage in different activities. So that's the kind of remarkable study. And part of why it's so remarkable is that up until now, basic words or phrases or images had been decoded from the brain, but not continuous language, not imagined thoughts themselves, meaning actual mind reading is possible. I'll just add one caveat to that, which I know we'll get into the discussion of issues of mental privacy. The study itself looked at whether or not people could employ countermeasures to it. And it also looked to see whether a system trained on one person's brain could be used on another unwilling participant. Like, are all of our brain activities the same? And they found that no, it goes down to basically chance to decode brain activity trained on one person on another person, and that you could consciously employ countermeasures. Those are good first steps at trying to figure out the extent to which this could really compromise mental privacy for people who are coerced into using the technology. Doesn't really answer what happens when people willingly use it, which is what I foresee as the coming future.
And just for the benefit of our future podcast listeners there, Nita was holding a kind of narrow, thin, it looks quite light, it looks like a headband in many ways, with kind of just thin, are they kind of magnetic strips, Nita, on the inside?
Yeah, so what this is this is maybe like about 1.5 inches thick, wide plastic headband that's worn across the forehead. On the inside, there's just this rubber, piece that has a few different light sources, 4 different light sources here, that when used just basically sends light through the skull into the brain to pick up brain activity as it is diffused across different brain tissue based on different amounts of oxygen being consumed in different regions of the brain. And this just pairs with an app on a phone to pick up basic meditation states. It's not trained on the classifier that we were just talking about. It'll be very interesting to see if a device like this one could have much more sophisticated software to do much more sophisticated decoding from the brain.
So just to boil down then where we are and where we're getting to when it comes to, I guess, brain transparency or interpretation of brain data. Right now, if people are using these devices, they're broadly reading brain, like their mind states, so whether they're relaxed or concentrated or happy or things like that. And are we moving then towards a world where maybe specific, actually formed thoughts, someone imagining something, or someone thinking a word or a sentence, these are going to be the things that become decipherable next as these classifiers become more powerful?
I think that's right. The question still remains an open question of how much can a portable device pick up as opposed to the large, cumbersome devices. But the proof of concept in a large, cumbersome device for actual thought decoding is now here, right? I mean, published in Nature. There was another study that was published about a month ago that did image decoding from the brain using stable diffusion, which is, again, a form of generative AI, to try to figure out if new advances in AI would enable much more sophisticated decoding. So based on today's technology for portable devices, it's brain states. For less portable but still non-invasive devices like fMRI, already it's possible to decode images that a person is imagining, thoughts, in terms of continuous language and inner monologue, imagined thought that a person is having. And so, is the bridge between those big cumbersome devices and these smaller portable devices a long bridge or a short bridge? It seems like with how quickly generative AI is moving and the advances in that space, and if it's possible to have devices like the one that I was showing, this FNIRS device, it may be a lot closer than people realize.
I mean, I have to say, we're living in a moment where I think we're all realizing every day moments where the realities of the present collide with ideas of science fiction and things we thought impossible. But actual real-time mind reading, for me at least, is one of the most palpable moments of all, of just thinking it is just so insane that we're close to being able to do these kinds of things.
I mean, I agree, right? So having written this book and lived with neurotechnology for quite a while and thought about these issues for quite a while, it's less alarming to me already, right? It's more normalized for me than I think for many. But in this moment, when people are really struggling with, I think, the existential crises that so many are facing with respect to, like, what does generative AI mean for humanity? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be living in an age in which so much of our lives are interdependent with these technologies? To then say, like, and also they can decode what's literally happening in your mind, I think is incredibly startling for people. And, that's why I wrote this book, as both a wake-up call for people to realize what's happening with neurotechnology today, the promise of it, but also the peril of it. And so, I think most people feel like, oh my gosh, how are we ever going to catch up with regulation or laws or norms with respect to generative AI? We're still at a moment before with neurotechnology happening at scale across society. But I think we're literally at a moment before it going to scale across society, because we've been talking about the devices generally. What's coming now is the sensors being part of everyday devices. So I have on AirPods right now, and I showed you a headband that most of us are not likely to go through our lives wearing on a day-to-day basis. But the devices are now coming in the form of sensors for EEG, where the sensors are embedded in earbuds and headphones, and even watches that pick up brain activity as it travels down, your arm to your wrist, and pick up your intention to move or to type or to swipe. And so in the same way that people are wearing watches that pick up heart rate, or rings that pick up their temperature or breaths or sleep activity, so too will brain activity be picked up through these multifunctional devices. And that, when that happens, which is all being launched within the next few months, that really will take this to scale in society. So we have a moment where it's kind of the moment before. We're at the moment after for generative AI going to scale across society. We're at the moment before of neurotechnology going to scale across society.
And in that moment, just before we as consumers collide with this, what's kind of happening in the kind of, I guess, the commercial front then? Are we seeing like the very large B2C companies currently like gobbling up the labs? Is that currently,
yes.
And
it's not just the labs. So, I mean, there's a lot of commercial small neurotech companies who've been developing these sensors for quite a while, or developing the technology and the products for a while. One of the first major acquisitions in this space happened in 2019. So in 2018, I saw a presentation by a company then called Control Labs, where what they were demonstrating was an early prototype of a watch or a bracelet, where what it could do was pick up brain activity, as I was describing, going down your arm to your wrist, and pick up your intention to type on a keyboard, to enable you then to type on a virtual keyboard, or not even type, but to think about typing and to decode from your intention to type or to communicate from your wrist. And that was the first I'd really seen the embedding of a sensor in a form that could be part of our everyday devices. And it was the first time I'd seen an illustration of the technology in a way that was more about interfacing with other technologies rather than a standalone application. So neural interface could be about you trying to see your own brain activity. Are you stressed? Are you relaxed? Are you tired? Or it could be how, like, picking up your intention to swipe and type to replace your keyboard and your mouse. And they were illustrating it for that purpose as the way you interface with other technologies. Meta acquired that company in 2019 for somewhere between 500 million to $1 billion US. That was the first of these major tech announcements of the investment by big tech into neurotechnology as part of neural interface. Since then, Google, Microsoft, Apple, all of them have either acquired neurotech companies or significantly scaled their own efforts in the space to develop sensors of their own. And so what you see is both a gobbling up of the smaller neurotech companies, like Snap recently acquired a company out of Paris called NextMind to integrate neural sensors into their augmented reality devices that they're developing. And so that's what you're seeing. You're seeing either the acquisition of talent, the acquisition of the smaller neurotech companies who've developed the specific neural sensors, or the in-house capability that's rapidly developing within each of the institutions themselves.
So Nita, let's now get to the threat, the kind of the hazard that is upon us. Because I mean, I very much read your book as a wake-up call, of course, you know, where you've got the kind of autocrats and the surveillance capitalists and the hackers and the kind of, you know, centers of state power and surveillance, all kind of in a way like in this new kind of gold rush with our brain data right in the middle.
Right.
So what if things don't change, what's the kind of fear that you have for what will happen as these consumer devices get rolled out and everyone's brain data starts getting recorded?
Yeah. Let me say, before I answer that directly, Carl, I'm first going to take on the why in the world would anybody choose to use one of the devices, because it helps better inform the threat of it as well, which is people are very used to tracking now their heart rate, their breaths, their sleep, their body temperature, and yet they have almost no information about what's happening in their own brains. And the possibilities of being able to track everything from your stress levels to, you know, potential cognitive decline over time for somebody who's an epileptic, to be able to get, you know, information about an epileptic seizure minutes to an hour before it occurs, to detect the earliest stages of glioblastoma or Parkinson's or any of the neurodegenerative diseases, or to have new tools to be able to fight depression or mental health disorders or drug use disorders at scale, I think will be transformational for people. Even just be able to know, do I really focus better at home in this hotel room or, you know, in my office setting? And to have real metrics of information about yourself, I think is the reason why people will use it. And then as the companies invest in it being the way that you interface much more seamlessly and with less friction with other technology. So you think about sending a text message instead of typing it with your thumbs, which is much faster and more efficient. And by the way, maybe you can do it while you're driving a car and it's safer as well, right? These are the ways in which I think people start to adopt it. All of the major tech companies, all of the investment in the space recognizes the huge market potential, which is, you know, brain sensors don't exist in our everyday technology. We're not quantifying brain health in the same way that we treat the rest of our physical health. And so the possibility, just as a market segment, to sell the devices themselves is bringing a huge number of corporations to the table in this kind of rush to see who can sell the devices, who can corner this market.
I mean, you almost sold me.
Right,
I mean,
right, almost.
There's a brilliant
right? And you were
section
like,
in
that
Nita's
sounds great.
book about
I'm
cognitive
in.
enhancers,
Right.
and how it can make you, you know, but neurofeedback might be able to help you learn and think more clearly, concentrate better. And I was reading that and I was thinking, this sounds absolutely brilliant.
Right. And I think people
like
will embrace it for those reasons. I think the upside potential will lead people to rush to it. I also think that they will, when it's in your earbuds or your headphones, the risks will become invisible to them. And so what are those risks? One is the surveillance capitalism economy is about commodifying data, and the gold mine of data that is brain data is what, like, all of the companies recognize it. And so the commodification of brain data has already begun by these smaller neurotech companies. Now imagine you're a Meta and you can say to an advertiser, I can give you not just what they're clicking likes on or how much time they're spending on their device or how they scroll through something, but literally how their brain reacts to your advertisement, right? I mean, that's gold for Meta. And so to be able to commodify brain data as people are on devices or interacting with their environment or interacting with software, of course, is part of it, right? But that means that how you think and feel, your biases, your emotions, all of that, which is being in some ways inferred from your everyday activities with a much greater degree of precision, can start to be commodified by companies. And it's one thing to recognize that the precision of micro-targeting and manipulation of behavior that can occur at scale is frightening. Then you look at the way governments can misuse this as well, whether that is like, intelligence agencies who already spy on phones or emails can start to spy on brain activity, or law enforcement worldwide who are already interrogating brains of criminal suspects using neurotechnology and can start to do so with much greater precision and at scale, to the chilling effect it has on freedom of speech, right? Surveillance, there have been lots of studies that have been done that show that government surveillance chills people's willingness to speak up, to express dissident views. When people are required to wear brain devices in the workplace, which again is already happening in a number of workplaces worldwide, is already happening in regimes like China, where state workers are required to wear brain surveillance devices to pick up their brain activity to see if they are tired or awake or paying attention or bored or engaged, but are also being used to interrogate their brains, whether it's to discover information about people or to chill their variability to think dissident thoughts or big thoughts or any thoughts whatsoever. I think the risks are profound.
Do you think this is another one of those circumstances where technology brings kind of oppressions and liberations kind of wrapped up together in this kind of fiendishly complicated and knotty way, which means it's very, very hard for us to kind of disentangle one from the other in a way to either stop or change direction?
I think yes and no. So on the one hand, I think the bad comes with the good, right? I mean, introducing an era of greater brain transparency means that your brain is now available to you to be able to know a lot more about, your doctor to know more about, but also corporations and governments to know much more about, also other people in society. The no part of it is, it doesn't have to be that employers and corporations and governments have access to the data, right? That's just been our default mode of operation with respect to all of the data that has been aggregated and commodified and collected about individuals over time. But what if we did it differently? What if we decided this is a new category of technology? This is a new frontier, the final frontier for humanity, for privacy and for mental privacy and for self-determination over our brains and mental experiences. And as that final frontier, we should approach it differently. Before it goes to scale across society, we should put into place different rules and regulations and treat it differently. We should require that brain data be overwritten on device, that individuals have the option for multifunctional devices to turn off a switch that says brainwave data should not be collected now while I'm on this conference call or this webinar or this podcast or talking to my friend or loved one or having an intimate conversation, right? There are basic choices we could make now that could fundamentally change the trajectory of this so that it really is mostly upside, right? There's always misuse. There's always downsides of technology. There's always bad actors, but we could make choices that would substantially limit the effects of it.
Well, let's talk about those choices. Well, let's talk about the frameworks, Nita, because I can already see there's a question in the chat about George Orwell. But before we get there, let's introduce another kind of important thinker, John Stuart Mill, because I know that Mill and kind of consequentialist like liberal philosophy is very important to your thinking. So why did you alight on Mill as being one of the kind of main philosophical signposts for you to kind of navigate this terrain?
It's a good question. So, I mean, my thoughts on this were really, what we need is not neurotech rights and AI rights and metaverse rights. What we need is an update to our basic conception of what liberty means in the digital age. And John Stuart Mill's book on liberty really looks, closely and is seminal in this idea of like, what is liberty and what is fundamental to it? And the way in which he really navigated that question, looking at the autonomy of individual over self, and then self vis-a-vis society and self vis-a-vis government, and the basic conceptions around freedom of thought, to me spoke a lot to how I've been thinking about the relationship of individuals to self with the ability to access the information about themselves, their own brain data, vis-a-vis society. And here I'm thinking of corporations and others having access to your brain data, and vis-a-vis governments and the potential interferences with it. So that seemed like a good starting place to think about both what is a broad conception of an update of liberty in the digital age, and what's the missing piece, right? If you read On Liberty, Mill imagined a world in which our brains could not be accessed, that we had the solace of the mind, that freedom of thoughts if you could hear a diversity of ideas, that you would have the private space to be able to ruminate and to think about and to be able to develop your own perspective. He didn't imagine this world in which that might not be possible. And most theories of human flourishing have always assumed that the autonomy of self over brain and mental experiences was robust and would remain. In a world in which that isn't true and which is no longer possible, it seems like Mill as a starting place for liberty to think about on cognitive liberty was the right beginning point for the theory.
And in essence, Nita, what would the theory say? So a kind of an updated Mill. What would that give us now? Would it be framework?
So it turns out we need to go farther than Mill to really have an updated theory. But Go ahead, please. Yeah.
Well, no. So your framework then, borrowing from Mill and lots of other people too, and your own ideas. How would that meaningfully guide both the development of the technology and I suppose the rights and opportunities that consumers and individuals have around brain data and how it's used?
Yeah. So it's the way that I've been kind of framing it is to say cognitive liberty is both a right to self-determination, that is a right to access information about our own brains, to change them if we choose to do so, but also a right from interference with our mental privacy and our freedom of thought. And understanding the kind of landscape this way, the idea of the right to self-determination really derives more from something like John Locke, which is the idea of self-ownership and self-governance, that the starting place for democratic systems, the starting place for human flourishing begins with this idea of self-ownership and self-determination. But that idea, this kind of positive aspect of liberty in the digital age, is there are huge benefits to technologies. Humanity is moving in the direction of a much greater interrelationship with technology. And the right to be able to use those technologies to change our mental experiences, to enhance, as you said, you were drawn to the ability to be able to enhance your own brain, right? That's part of what we do as humans. And so it's not just a right to non-interference, it's a right to the positive aspects and to be able to use and access and change our brains and experiences through the use of technologies and interactions with them. But importantly, a right from interference requires that we have a much more robust understanding of concepts of privacy as a relative right, meaning there are some times in which societal interventions into brains and mental experiences will make sense, but mental privacy would mean our automatic reactions, our emotions, our very thoughts would be protected against unwarranted intrusions. And then a much narrower aspect of the theory is freedom of thought. So freedom of thought right now, as it's understood in international human rights law, primarily focuses on religion and belief. There's been very important work that's been done in this space, both by other scholars and also by the previous mandate holder to the UN Declaration of Human Rights for freedom of thought, which was Dr. Ahmed Shahid. He presented a report in October of 2021 to the UN General Assembly, arguing that our conception of freedom of thought really needs to be expanded to address interception, manipulation, and punishment for our thoughts. And I think that makes a lot of sense. The question then is just, how do we define thought? And here I think thought is the really narrow sliver of robust thoughts and images in our minds, because we try to read others' minds all the time. We try to manipulate other people all the time. We try to persuade other people all the time. We don't want to interfere with ordinary human interactions, but we do want to safeguard us against interference with our very thoughts and images in our minds.